The crickets and tree frogs fall silent. For the Marine on the listening post 50 meters outside the wire, that sudden silence is more terrifying than any explosion. It means they are out there. In 1967, in the dense, humid jungles of Icor, the night was not a neutral void. It was an active, hostile entity. It belonged, without contest, to the Viet Cong. For the American forces, survival was measured in the yards of concertina wire and the number of trip flares separating them from the impenetrable wall of black. This was the fundamental equation of jungle warfare, an equation written in fear, paranoia, and the constant draining exhaustion of men who knew they were being watched by an enemy they could not see. The night was a tactical fortress for the Viet Cong and a psychological prison for the Marines. Inside the sandbagged bunkers of firebases like Con Thien or Landing Zone Stud, the air was thick with the smell of damp earth, sweat, and cordite. Young Marines, 18 and 19 years old, strained their ears against the cacophony of the jungle, trying to isolate the one sound that did not belong: the metallic snip of wire cutters, the soft thud of a mortar tube finding earth, the rustle of canvas that was too close. This was not for lack of trying. American defensive doctrine was a layered, technological marvel. It included the M18 Claymore, a devastating directional mine, but the Viet Cong sappers had learned to crawl, feel the tripwires, and patiently, expertly, turn the mines around to face the American positions. It included sophisticated seismic and acoustic sensors, like the AN divided by TPS-21 beeper, dropped along trails to detect movement. But the Viet Cong learned to fool them by herding cattle ahead of their columns or by moving with such infinite slowness that they registered as natural ground vibration. Each solution was met with a countermeasure. The American soldier, often a conscript on a 365-day tour, was a temporary and terrified visitor. The Viet Cong or North Vietnamese Army soldier was in his element, fighting in his own backyard. A man who had known this jungle, this darkness, his entire life. The listening post, or LP, was the symbol of this terror. 2 or 3 Marines would crawl out beyond the perimeter's final wire at dusk, settling into a shallow scrape in the earth, connected to the base only by a single, fragile landline telephone. Their job was to be the human tripwire. They were isolated, surrounded by the enemy, their survival dependent on whispering into a handset. The sheer primal fear of being on an LP, of hearing a sound 10 feet away and being unable to even raise your rifle for fear of the muzzle flash, was a defining experience of the war. Their tools against the darkness were primitive and often counterproductive. A trip flare, designed to illuminate an approach, would sputter to life with a magnesium-white glare, but it illuminated the Marine's own position just as effectively, drawing a burst of automatic weapons fire from the shadows. The primary tactic was the Mad Minute, a chaotic, 30-second eruption of machine gun and rifle fire, directed blindly into the surrounding jungle, a desperate attempt to disrupt an attack that might be forming. It was loud, it was visceral, but it was tactically bankrupt. It wasted ammunition, revealed the exact arcs of fire for every American weapon, and, most critically, it did nothing to harm an enemy who had learned to simply wait it out before resuming their silent advance. The Viet Cong, by contrast, were masters of the dark. They were phantoms, Ma, as the local villagers called them, ghosts. They practiced a level of noise discipline that was almost supernatural. Sappers, the elite of their forces, could spend hours crawling on their bellies, moving with the agonizing slowness of a vine growing, until they were inside the wire, right next to the howitzer pits or command bunkers. They carried satchel charges and Bangalore torpedoes, and they operated with the complete, arrogant confidence of men who own their environment. They used the dark as a shield, a weapon, and an unbreachable sanctuary. This nightly tyranny had a devastating psychological effect on the American troops. Sleep deprivation was a constant. Men finished a 4-hour watch on the line more exhausted than if they had run a marathon. The paranoia was corrosive. Every shadow moved, every breeze whispered of infiltration. The jungle itself, a wall of triple canopy vegetation, felt like a living creature, a dark animal waiting to pounce. The Marines were reacting, always reacting, to an enemy who dictated the time, place, and terms of every engagement from dusk until dawn. The night was a one-sided battleground, and the Americans were losing. The mathematics of this warfare were brutal and simple. The Viet Cong initiated, the Marines responded. The dark was their greatest strategic asset, a force multiplier that negated America's overwhelming advantages in air power and artillery. For thousands of American soldiers, the jungle night was an unconquerable enemy, a dark kingdom where they were blind guests. But in a laboratory in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, a new kind of eye was being forged, an eye that would soon turn this kingdom of shadows against its masters. It arrives at Da Nang Air Base in a locked steel footlocker, heavier than it looks. A young first lieutenant from the 1st Marine Division signs for it, having been told only that this thing will change the math. The crate contains the Army divided by Navy Portable Visual Searchlight, Model 2, or AN divided by PVS-2, known universally as the Starlight scope. The name was a partial misnomer. It required no searchlight. It was a piece of technology that bordered on magic. At 6 pounds, it was a heavy, awkward attachment for an M14 or M16 rifle, a bulky, metallic tube that looked like a prop from a science fiction serial. Its existence was the solution to a problem that had plagued armies for decades. In World War II and Korea, night vision had meant active infrared. Devices like the M3 snooper scope blasted a beam of invisible infrared light, which a special scope could then see. But this was a fatal flaw. The enemy, if they possessed even simple infrared detectors, could see that beam like a lighthouse, a perfect shoot-me signal. The PVS, too, was different. It was a Generation 1 passive device. It was an amplifier. The science was staggering for its time, the result of years of research at the U.S. Army's Night Vision Laboratory at Fort Belvoir and manufactured by companies like RCA and Vero, Incorporated. The scope's objective lens gathered the faintest traces of ambient light, the glow of a single star, the sliver of a crescent moon, the residual phosphorescence of the sky, and funneled those few photons onto a photocathode. This surface released a corresponding spray of electrons, which were then accelerated and multiplied exponentially inside a microchannel plate. A single electron would strike the plate and release thousands more in a cascading effect. This amplified electronic signal, multiplied some 40,000 times, then struck a phosphor screen at the rear of the tube, creating a visible, grainy, monochromatic green image. But this magic had limitations. It was useless in total, absolute darkness, like a cave or a sealed room. An overcast, moonless night severely degraded its performance. And a sudden, bright light, a muzzle flash, a trip flare, even a distant headlight would cause the image to bloom, washing out the screen in a blinding green-white flare that could temporarily burn the intensifier tube. The world, as seen through the PVS-2, was ethereal and alien. It had a narrow 10-degree field of view that created a disorienting, fisheye effect. It had almost no depth perception, making a bush at 50 meters look indistinguishable from a tree line at 300. Training was essential. Marines had to learn to scan slowly, to trust the grainy image, to compensate for the total lack of peripheral vision. The first time a Marine looked through it from a firebase bunker, the experience was psychologically transformative. He would lift the heavy, awkward device, complaining about the weight, and press his eye to the rubber cup. At first, there was only a grainy, swirling green static. Then, as his eye adjusted, the world resolved. He could see the individual barbs on the concertina wire 50 meters in front of him. He could see the leaves on the trees at the jungle's edge. He could see a water buffalo, completely invisible to the naked eye, standing motionless in a flooded paddy 300 meters away, and then he would see it, a shape, a human figure, moving with the slow, casual confidence of a man who believes he is totally invisible. A Viet Cong scout, his AK-47 slung, walking the perimeter, checking for weaknesses. The Marine's breath would catch in his throat. The man was exposed, clear as day, a perfect, glowing green target. This technology was, at first, a closely guarded secret. The scopes were kept in locked Conex containers, their use restricted to a handful of trained snipers and observers. The batteries, BA-1105U types, had a short life and were themselves classified. The doctrine was simple. This was a war-winning weapon, and the enemy could not, under any circumstances, know it existed. For the few Marines trained to use it, the psychological shift was immediate and profound. The dread of nightfall evaporated. The dark was no longer a prison, it was a hunting ground. The paranoia that had defined their existence was replaced by a cold, predatory anticipation. They were no longer the hunted, they were the hunters. The men who had been blind were now the only ones who could see. The technology was cumbersome, the image was grainy, and the battery life was short. But for the first time, American soldiers possessed a weapon that did not just fight the night, it conquered it. Nguyen Van Heep, a sapper with the C-10 Sapper Company of the Viet Cong, had breached American perimeters 7 times. He was a veteran, a professional, trained for months in obstacle breaching, silent movement, and demolitions. He knew the sounds of their wire, the smell of their cigarettes, and the exact 2 a.m. rhythm when the tower guards grew complacent. Tonight, his target was the M109 self-propelled howitzer pit on the west side of landing zone Baldy, a high-value target responsible for harassing fire on his unit's staging areas. He and his 3-man team had rehearsed this for a week on a perfect, full-scale mock-up of the Marine position. They carried 30 pounds of satchel charges, enough to destroy the guns and the command bunker. The moon was new, a sliver of blackness in a cloudy sky. The dark was their perfect, impenetrable shield. As he reached the outer layer of concertina wire, Heap smiled. He could hear the lazy cough of a guard, could smell the exhaust from a distant generator. The Americans were blind and deaf. He produced his wire cutters. In a sandbagged bunker designated 2 Alpha, Lance Corporal David Green rested the stock of his M40 sniper rifle on a sandbag, aiming it into a void of total blackness. He could not see his own hand in front of his face. Beside him, his spotter, Corporal James Cole, held a pair of binoculars to which the Starlight scope was attached. This was a new kind of warfare, built on a new kind of trust. Green was a trained marksman, but his skill was useless. He was, for all intents and purposes, a blind man, his finger resting lightly on the trigger of a rifle pointed at a wall of night. His entire world was the voice in his ear. Cole's voice was a dry, calm whisper over the radio handset. "I have movement. 2 o'clock, edge of the wire." Green saw nothing. "Okay," Cole whispered. "I have 4 targets. 4. Moving low. They're at the first wire." Cole's view was a grainy, green nightmare. He could see the 4 figures clearly. He could see the glint of Heap's wire cutters. He could see the bulky outline of the satchel charges on their backs. They moved with a terrifying professional slowness. Target 1, lead man, is through the first wire. Cole breathed. 200 meters. He's stopping. He's kneeling. Wait. He's cutting the second wire. Send it. Green did not see a target. He did not see a muzzle flash. He trusted the voice. He exhaled, held his breath, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the 7.62 millimeter round was violently loud in the quiet night. Nguyen Van Heep heard the supersonic snap of the bullet passing his ear an instant before the man in front of him. His cousin collapsed. There was no sound, just a heavy thud as the body fell onto the wire. Heap froze. There had been no muzzle flash. No machine gun, no flare, just a single, precise shot from the blackness. "Hit," Cole said, his voice level. "Target 2, reloading. He's dropped, moving right. He's crawling. Stop. Send it." Green worked the bolt, chambered a new round, aimed at the same patch of darkness, and fired. Crack. A second man, 10 feet to the right of the first, slumped and lay still. Heap felt a hot panic he had never known. This was Ma. This was sorcery. 2 men dead, and they had not seen a single flash. This was not war. This was execution by an invisible demon. He scrambled backward, abandoning his satchel charge, his training, his mission. He pushed himself through the wire he had just cut and ran, expecting a bullet in his back at any second. Cole watched him go. Target 3 and 4 are running. They're gone. 2 kills confirmed. Stand by. This single shot, fired in total darkness at an unseen enemy, represented more than just a kill. It was a complete reversal of the laws of war. If you find this history of unseen conflict and technological disruption fascinating, take a moment to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. The next morning, Marines followed Heap's trail of blood and found the two bodies tangled in the wire, along with the abandoned explosives. Heap, the lone survivor, stumbled back to his unit with an impossible story. His political officer dismissed it as cowardice, as delusion, as battlefield psychosis. Such a report was impossible, an ideological failure. The Americans were decadent and weak. They could not possess such magic. But the report and others like it began to spread. The psychological terror for the first time had crossed the wire. By late 1968, the ambushes had reversed. Marine hunter-killer teams no longer waited for the dark with dread. They welcomed it with the cold patience of an apex predator. The Starlight scope was no longer a purely defensive weapon. It was the heart of a new and terrifyingly effective offensive doctrine. The night, once the Viet Cong sanctuary, had become a killing field. The new tactic was simple. A two-man sniper team or a four-man fire team would be inserted by helicopter at dusk, or would patrol out from their firebase and set up in a concealed position along a known Viet Cong resupply trail. They would find a spot with a clear field of fire, set up the PVS-2, and wait. As total darkness fell, the jungle that had once been a wall of black became an illuminated stage. The Marines were now the phantoms. They would watch, sometimes for 6 or 8 hours, as the trail in front of them came alive. A column of porters, laden with rice, ammunition, and rockets, would appear in the green, grainy viewfinder, moving with casual confidence. A North Vietnamese Army mortar crew would emerge into a clearing to set up their tubes for a harassment strike. A Viet Cong sapper squad would assemble in a tree line to plan their attack. The numbers produced by these teams were staggering. The statistics represented a complete demolition of the Viet Cong's night fighting capability. In one 30-day period, in what was known as the Arizona Territory, south of the demilitarized zone, sniper teams from the 3rd Marine Division, using the AN divided by PVS-2, recorded over 200 confirmed enemy kills. The American casualties in those same engagements, 0. In the 1st Marine Division's area of operations, a single sniper platoon, Kate, recorded 98 confirmed night kills in a single month. The kill ratio, which had been a desperate 1-to-1 in chaotic, blind firefights, skyrocketed. For Starlight-equipped teams, it often approached 50-to-1. In many cases, it was infinite. But the true strategic impact, much like the American industrial might seen by German POWs, was logistical. The Viet Cong war machine ran on a hidden river of supplies moved by night. The Starlight scope allowed Marines to interdict this river. In the Mekong Delta, Navy SEALs and river patrol boats used the scopes to scan the dark canal banks. They decimated Viet Cong sampan convoys carrying medical supplies, weapons, and tax collections. In the Central Highlands, Army Special Forces teams set up on ridges overlooking the Ho Chi Minh Trail, watching mule trains and truck columns that believed they were perfectly concealed by the jungle canopy and the night. They didn't engage directly. They used the scope to call in devastatingly accurate artillery or airstrikes, the spotter walking the shells onto a target the gunners could not see. The psychological collapse of the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army units in these areas was total. This was their ideological collapse syndrome. Their entire doctrine was built on their immunity in the dark. Now, the dark was a death trap. Resupply missions vanished. Porters carrying critical supplies would simply disappear from the trail. Staging areas for attacks were decimated by a single sniper team they never saw and never heard, save for the crack of the rifles. Unit cohesion broke down. Reports describe porters refusing to move at night, entire units demanding to be transferred. Morale, the bedrock of the guerrilla, crumbled. The Chua Hoi, or defector, reports from this period became filled with a new kind of fear. It was not the rational fear of a superior enemy force. It was a superstitious, primal terror. The Viet Cong soldiers did not understand the technology, so they attributed it to the supernatural. They reported that the Marines had injected themselves with a serum, thuoc mat mayo, or cat-eye medicine, that allowed them to see at night. They told their handlers of Ma Zan, the green ghosts, American soldiers who hunted them from the shadows, whose eyes glowed green, and who could not be killed. This shift from hunted to hunter is one of the most dramatic psychological reversals in modern warfare. What other game-changing technologies can you think of? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The Viet Cong, who had built a revolution on their mastery of the invisible, were now being dismantled by it. But this technological invincibility, like all magic, was destined to be broken. The magic finally broke on a humid morning near the An Hoa Basin. A Viet Cong patrol, scavenging a battlefield after a night ambush, found a dead Marine sniper, his body draped over his M40 rifle, and attached to his rifle was the demon's eye itself. The patrol leader, a veteran of a dozen night attacks that had been mysteriously, bloodily repulsed, immediately recognized the value of the strange, bulky device. He knew this was the green eye from the rumors. The scope was not kept as a trophy. It was rushed north, past Da Nang, across the demilitarized zone, and all the way to Hanoi. There, it was presented to Soviet and Chinese military advisors who had been hearing the increasingly frantic and delusional reports from their allies for months. They disassembled it with intense interest. The magic was revealed for what it was, not a demon, not a potion, but technology. It was tubes, precision-ground lenses, and a battery pack. The psychological terror of the supernatural was gone, instantly replaced by the cold, hard reality of a technological gap. The Soviet and Chinese technicians were stunned. Their own night vision capabilities were almost exclusively Generation Zero, active infrared systems, relics that required bulky, power-hungry illuminators. The American PVS-2, with its passive, ambient light-gathering microchannel plate, was light years ahead of their research. This was a technological shock equivalent to the German discovery of Allied radar on cargo ships. For the Soviet Union, this was a major intelligence failure. It proved their adversary had made a generational leap in optoelectronics, a field crucial to armor, aviation, and infantry warfare. The captured PVS-2 became one of the most important pieces of foreign technology acquired by the KGB in the entire decade. Blueprints were drawn, components analyzed, and a frantic top-priority program was initiated to close this night vision gap. And gaps the North Vietnamese army knew could be closed. They were brilliant at adaptation. Once they understood the principal light amplification, they developed countermeasures. The first was crude but effective. They learned that a simple flashlight, or even a flare, shined in the direction of the American line would bloom the PVS-2's image intensifier tube, blinding the user in a sudden, overwhelming flare of green light. Viet Cong sappers began carrying high-powered flashlights, sacrificing their own night vision for the chance to blind the American demon's eye at the critical moment of their assault. North Vietnamese Army regulars began using their RPD and RPK machine guns at night, firing bursts of tracer rounds not to hit a specific target, but to intentionally bloom and blind any Starlight scopes in their field of fire. They learned to move faster, in staggered rushes, knowing they were visible, rather than relying on the slow, methodical crawl that had made them perfect targets. The technological arms race for the night had begun. The Soviets, using the captured scope, reverse-engineered the technology and accelerated development of their own night vision device, the NSP-2, which would soon appear in the hands of North Vietnamese Army regulars. The spell of invincibility was broken, but the tactical balance of the war had been permanently altered. The Viet Cong's era of uncontested ownership of the night was over, forever. They could no longer assemble, resupply, or attack with impunity. The math had changed. The Army divided by Navy Portable Visual Searchlight Model 2 was, in retrospect, the Model T of night vision. It was heavy, primitive, had a short battery life, and its narrow field of view was disorienting, but it worked. It proved a concept that would define the next 50 years of warfare. It led directly to the smaller, lighter PVS-4 and PVS-7, and eventually to the thermal imaging and digital fusion optics that allow a 21st-century soldier to see a human heat signature from miles away. This story of innovation and adaptation is a powerful reminder of how technology shapes conflict. If you know someone who would appreciate this deep dive into military history, please share this video with them. The legacy of the Starlight scope was not just in the kill ratios. Its true impact was the psychological transformation of the American soldier. The Marine in the bunker was no longer a blind victim waiting for the dark to consume him. He was a hunter, an apex predator, armed with an electronic eye that had stolen the night. The green, ghostly image of the Starlight scope did more than reveal enemy soldiers in the dark. It revealed the future of warfare. The night, once the ultimate sanctuary for the guerrillas, had been abolished. It was now just another battlefield, illuminated by the cold, electronic glow of human ingenuity. Thank you for watching. The struggle to control the battlefield, even the dark itself, is a constant theme in military history. If you want more deep dives into the technology, tactics, and stories that shaped our world, please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. And let us know in the comments what piece of game-changing technology you'd like us to cover next.